Get on your knees and lick it up, you pathetic old hag. Richie Gallo's designer loafer nudged a puddle of spilled soda, the sticky liquid seeping toward Anya Sharma's worn-out sneakers. The 48-year-old woman didn't react, her eyes fixed on the book she was trying to salvage from the mess on the floor. She just knelt, her back aching, and began wiping the floor with a rag. "That's it. Know your place, Grandma," Richie sneered, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings of the nearly empty bookstore. His two goons, mountains of muscle in tight black shirts, chuckled along, their laughter a low, menacing rumble. "Maybe next time you'll remember who runs this part of the city before you get behind on your community tax." Richie crouched down, grabbing a handful of Anya's salt and pepper hair, and viciously yanked her head back. He forced her to meet his dead, shark-like eyes. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're gonna learn some goddamn respect." What Richie Gallo didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the weary, tired eyes staring back into his belonged to the most lethal woman he would ever meet. In less than a minute, Richie was going to learn a lesson, but it wouldn't be about respect. It would be about the catastrophic error of mistaking a resting tiger for a house cat. Have you ever poked a sleeping bear with a stick, just to see what would happen? What do you think happens when a predator, so used to being the hunter, suddenly finds himself locked in a cage with something far, far deadlier? Before we even get into the brutal fallout of this moment, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of the carnage that's about to unfold. Anya Sharma had been the proprietor of The Daily Grind, a bookstore and coffee shop in a forgotten corner of Baltimore, for 11 months. Every single day felt like trying to plug a sinking ship with chewing gum. The shop was her desperate attempt at a normal life, wedged between a boarded-up laundromat and a check-cashing place with iron bars on the windows. The place smelled of old paper, bitter coffee, and quiet desperation. The vinyl on the reading chairs was cracked, held together by strips of electrical tape. The espresso machine gasped and shuddered like a terminal patient. The neon sign out front, a single flickering coffee cup, had given up the ghost 6 months ago. Anya couldn't afford to fix it. She could barely afford the beans. But this defeated shop owner, this invisible, middle-aged woman, was a phantom. A carefully constructed illusion. The real Anya Sharma was nothing like the woman mopping up Richie Gallo's mess. For 18 years, she was known by another name, Kali. Agent Kali of the CIA's Special Activities Center. She was a ghost, a whisper, a weapon honed in the darkest corners of the world. She had dismantled terror cells in the Hindu Kush, posed as a journalist to extract defectors from North Korea, and survived a Chechen black site by convincing her captors she was a more valuable asset alive than dead. She had walked into rooms where the air was thick with the promise of death, and she had walked out, alone, every single time. This current assignment was supposed to be a quiet wind-down before retirement, a milk run. Her mission: establish a deep cover identity in Baltimore and monitor the Gallo crime family. Intelligence chatter suggested that Salvatore Sal Gallo, a notoriously cunning and vicious mob boss, was using the city's port to smuggle in something far more dangerous than drugs or weapons. Anya's job was to be a fly on the wall. Watch, listen, and build a case from the ground up. The transformation had been meticulous. CIA trainers had taught her how to stoop her shoulders, how to walk with the exhausted shuffle of a woman worn down by a lifetime of disappointments. She'd stopped coloring her hair, letting the silver streaks dominate. She'd put on 30 pounds of soft weight, masking the coiled steel of muscle beneath. The calluses on her hands were real, earned by scrubbing floors and washing dishes, not from years of mastering hand-to-hand combat. But some instincts are too deeply ingrained to be erased. Her posture would snap straight when she thought she was alone. Her eyes, seemingly vacant, tracked every person who entered the store, assessing threat levels, noting exits, and identifying potential weapons in a fraction of a second. When she used a box cutter to open a shipment of new paperbacks, she held it not like a shopkeeper, but like a surgeon or an assassin. The few regulars at the daily grind were her only link to the quiet life she pretended to want. Frank, a grizzled Vietnam vet with a permanent limp, came in every morning at 600 sharp for a black coffee and the morning paper. He'd sit for hours, nursing the one cup, the unspoken trauma of his past a silent bond between them. Maya, a bright-eyed college student from Johns Hopkins, used the quietest corner booth to study, always ordering a chai latte and a croissant Anya knew she couldn't really afford. Anya would often forget to charge her for it. These people saw a kind, struggling woman. They had no idea the person who remembered their orders could disable a man in 3 seconds with a ballpoint pen. The financial pressure, however, was becoming a real and suffocating threat. The bookstore was a money pit, and the protection payments to the Gallo family were bleeding her dry. The health inspector, a man clearly on Sal Gallo's payroll, was a frequent visitor, finding new, expensive violations with every visit. Customers were dwindling, scared off by the growing sense of menace that clung to the neighborhood like a shroud. Anya documented everything. Encrypted hard drives stored in a false-bottomed coffee bean bin held a terrifying portrait of a community being systematically strangled. Local businesses were being bled dry by extortion. Drug runners operated openly on street corners. And at the heart of it all were entitled arrogant thugs like Richie Gallo, a second-generation monster who confused cruelty with strength. What Richie and his crew of steroid-fueled morons didn't get was that they were just pawns in Sal Gallo's grand chess game. Sal was using them to systematically crush every independent business in a 6-block radius. He was clearing the way for a massive, city-sanctioned redevelopment project that would net him hundreds of millions, all laundered through a web of shell corporations. The entire neighborhood was being gutted to serve his criminal enterprise. Marcus Thorne, Anya's CIA handler, met her bi-weekly at the Baltimore Museum of Art. They'd stand before a 17th-century painting, discussing brushstrokes and color palettes, their coded conversation transmitting surveillance reports and operational updates. The name Kali was a legend back at Langley. She'd earned it during the takedown of the Volkov Bratva in Moscow, an operation where she spent 3 years embedded within the inner circle of Russia's most feared crime syndicate. That operation ended with the dismantling of an empire and a body count that was still classified. But tonight, feeling the sticky soda soak into the knees of her jeans and Richie Gallo's foul breath on her face, Anya Sharma felt that old familiar fire begin to stir. The part of her that had been dormant for almost a year, the part that was Kaylee, was starting to wake up. The floor was clean, but Richie wasn't done. He wanted to break her. What he was about to do was not just break the rules of his father's game. He was about to make it brutally, violently personal. And in doing so, he was going to give Agent Coley the justification she had been secretly craving. Richie Gallo returned the next day. Not with 2 men, but with 5. They swaggered through the door of the daily grind during the lunch rush, what little of it there was. Frank the vet was in his usual spot, and a young mother was trying to read a picture book to her toddler in the kids' corner. They both looked up, a knot of fear tightening in their stomachs. "Well, well," Richie boomed, his voice dripping with faux joviality. "Looks like the place is packed. Business must be good." He flashed a predatory grin. "Mind if we join you for a chat?" Anya appeared from behind the counter, a dish towel in her hand. Her face was a blank mask. "It's a public place. Table for 6?" Richie's laugh was like shattering glass. "Oh, we're not here to drink your burnt coffee, sweetheart. We're here to renegotiate your membership in our little business association." He snapped his fingers, and his men fanned out, their bulky frames blocking the only exit. "See, the neighborhood is going upscale, and in an upscale neighborhood, protection costs more." The young mother quickly scooped up her child, dropped a crumpled $10 bill on the table, and scurried for the door. Richie's men parted just enough to let her through, their eyes following her with wolfish hunger. $1,000 a week, Richie said, picking up a pristine hardcover copy of Moby Dick and examining his reflection in its glossy cover. "Think of it as an investment in your future. A lot of unforeseen accidents can happen to a business without proper insurance." Anya's hands didn't even tremble as she started wiping down the already clean counter. "I don't have $1,000 a week. I'm 3 months behind on rent." "Oh, then maybe this ain't the business for you," Richie said conversationally. He suddenly hurled the heavy book against a shelf of poetry, sending smaller paperbacks flying like startled birds. The spine cracked with a sound like a breaking bone. "Accidents. Inventory gets damaged. Equipment fails. Sometimes your few remaining customers start to feel unwelcome." He nodded to his men. 2 of them pulled out cans of black spray paint and began scrawling crude obscenities and gang tags across her front windows. Frank, the vet, stood up slowly, his fists clenched. One of Richie's thugs shoved him hard, sending the old man stumbling back into his chair. Another goon swept an entire tray of coffee mugs off the counter. The crash of shattering ceramic mixed with the hiss of the spray cans and Richie's delighted laughter. "Next week," Richie said, stepping over a shard of a broken mug. "Same time, have the money, or the next thing we burn down won't be your inventory." They left, leaving Anya alone in the wreckage of her quiet life. She dialed 911, knowing it was a pointless gesture. 2 uniformed officers strolled in half an hour later. They glanced around with profound boredom, took a statement with all the enthusiasm of men watching paint dry, and gave her a victim's pamphlet. "Look, lady," the older cop said, not bothering to hide his sigh. "You're in Gallo territory. You want our advice? Pay the man. It's cheaper in the long run." The message was crystal clear. No one was coming to help. That night, Richie's men parked a car across the street, its headlights aimed directly at her windows, their silhouettes visible as they smoked and laughed. They weren't just watching her, they were putting her on display, a warning to the entire neighborhood. Richie Gallo thought he had just asserted his dominance. What he'd actually done was give Agent Cayley a legitimate, documented reason to go to war. Richie Gallo was enjoying this. The fear in Anya Sharma's eyes was more satisfying than any cash payment. For weeks, he orchestrated a campaign of psychological torture designed not just to bankrupt her, but to shatter her spirit. This was no longer about business. It was a spectator sport. The harassment was a symphony of cruelty, each act more brazen than the last. His men would lean against her windows for hours, staring in, making every potential customer turn and walk away. They'd follow Frank to his car, asking him loudly if he liked supporting a business that was bringing filth into their neighborhood. One morning, Anya arrived to find the lock on her front door filled with super glue. Another day, a dead rat was left on her doorstep, a small, grim warning. The crooked health inspector made another surprise visit, this time finding evidence of a cockroach infestation in a sealed bag of coffee beans. The citation came with a mandatory 2-day closure and a fine that was more than she made in a month. From Richie's warped perspective, he was playing the game perfectly. His father, Sal, had given him this 6-block radius as a test, a chance to prove he was more than just the boss's son. Crushing a stubborn old woman in a failing bookstore was his final exam. He saw it as clearing out the last bit of urban blight before the real money, the developers and their luxury condos, moved in. "She's a tough one, I'll give her that," Richie bragged to his second-in-command, a hulking brute named Tony, as they watched Anya scrubbing graffiti off her brick wall for the third time that week. But they all have a breaking point. You just gotta find the right button to push. Richie had learned the art of intimidation at his father's knee. Sal Gallo had taught him that psychological terror was a far more powerful tool than simple violence. Violence could inspire revenge. True terror left a victim feeling isolated, helpless, and utterly alone. "Break their will," his father always said, "and their wallet will open itself." The pressure mounted daily. Silent phone calls to her apartment above the store at 3 a.m., wholesale deliveries of coffee and milk that were mysteriously lost in transit. Frank, her most loyal customer, still came every morning, but the defiance in his eyes was replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Maybe you should just pack it in, Anya," he whispered one morning, his voice thick with concern. "There's no shame in admitting you're beat." But Agent Cayley had spent 2 decades studying the minds of men like Richie Gallo. She recognized the classic escalation pattern of a predator toying with its prey. Every act was designed to chip away at her sanity, to make her feel completely cut off from the world. She documented it all with chilling precision. Time-stamped photos of the vandalism, audio recordings of the threatening phone calls, a detailed log of every single interaction, every veiled threat, every swaggering posture. The true battle was internal. Her CIA training, her every instinct, screamed for direct, violent action. She could end this in 5 minutes, but her handler, Marcus Thorne, was adamant. The larger mission, uncovering what Sal Gallo was smuggling through the port, was paramount. "You've been in worse, Cayley," Marcus had reminded her during their last meet. "You survived a Serbian interrogation cell. You can handle some street-level punk." But this felt different. The men she'd faced before were professionals, operating by a twisted code of conduct. Richie Gallo was a spoiled, insecure bully, playing at being a gangster, which made him dangerously unpredictable. He had no code. He had no honor. He only had a deep-seated need to inflict pain. The breaking point, the line that could never be uncrossed, came when Richie dug into her past. Through a corrupt clerk at City Hall, he learned about her late partner, David. A fellow CIA agent killed during an operation in Bogota that had gone sideways 10 years ago. Anya kept a small, framed photo of him on a shelf behind the counter, the only personal item in the entire store. The next morning, she found the photo nailed to her front door with an ice pick. Someone had used a red permanent marker to draw a crude bullet hole right between David's smiling eyes. Standing on the cold sidewalk, holding the desecrated photograph, Anya felt a seismic shift deep within her soul. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart, the ones that separated Agent Kali from Anya Sharma, began to crumble into dust. This was no longer a mission. This wasn't about surveillance or intelligence gathering. Richie Gallo had just declared a personal war, and he had aimed his first shot at the one thing she held sacred. That evening, Richie and his crew, now 8 men strong, arrived for what he dramatically called the final negotiation. They didn't even bother to hide the tire irons and baseball bats they carried. The time for subtlety was over. "Last chance, you miserable bitch," Richie announced, slamming his aluminum bat on the countertop, leaving a deep dent in the cheap laminate. $2,000 a week starting now, or we burn this shithole to the ground with you in it." Anya slowly looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the men. Her mind, a highly trained tactical computer, was instantly cataloging their positions, their weapons, their stances. For the first time in 11 months, she let herself see them not as a terrified shopkeeper, but as Agent Cayley would see them. Ill-trained, overconfident, amateur thugs who had just threatened the wrong woman. Richie Gallo thought he was delivering the killing blow to a broken-down old lady. He had no idea he was staring into the eyes of a weapon the United States government had spent millions of dollars to perfect. Anya closed the shop 2 hours early that night. She flipped the open sign to closed, pulled down the rattling metal security gate, and locked the front door. Richie's men were still across the street, their laughter echoing in the empty street, but she moved with the deliberate, slow pace of a defeated woman. It was all part of the performance. Once inside her small apartment upstairs, the transformation was instantaneous. The defeated slump of her shoulders vanished, replaced by the ramrod straight posture of a trained operative. Her tired shuffle became a silent, purposeful stride. She went to her bedroom closet, pushed aside the few drab clothes she owned, and pressed a section of the back wall. A hidden panel clicked open. Inside was a collection of equipment that no struggling bookstore owner should ever possess: an encrypted satellite phone, miniature high-resolution cameras, sophisticated audio bugs, and a tablet containing the complete psychological workups of every major player in the Baltimore underworld. And on top, a thick digital file labeled Gallo Richard Ritchie. M. His profile was a pathetic cliché, a trust fund parasite who had squandered every opportunity given to him. He was desperate for the approval of his powerful father, a man who saw him as little more than a useful, if blunt, instrument. But within the profile were his weaknesses, the psychological triggers Anya could exploit. A raging inferiority complex, a pathological need to be seen as a tough guy, and, most importantly, a complete inability to recognize when he was out of his depth. He couldn't back down from a challenge, especially from a woman. It was a fatal flaw. Anya began to formulate a new plan, one that went far beyond her original mission parameters. This was no longer just about intelligence gathering for the CIA. This was about justice and retribution. She couldn't expose her cover, not yet. But she could manipulate Ritchie into destroying himself. The strategy was classic psychological warfare, a tactic she'd used to turn warlords against each other in Afghanistan. Make the enemy believe he's winning, right up until the moment the trap springs shut. She spent the next hour rigging the bookstore. Micro cameras, no bigger than a screw head, were placed in the light fixtures and inside the spines of thick books on the shelves. Tiny audio recorders were slipped into the sugar dispenser and the napkin holder on the main counter. By tomorrow night, every word Ritchie spoke, every threat he made, would be captured in pristine, evidence-grade quality. But Anya's greatest asset was something Ritchie, in his arrogance, couldn't see. The community, beaten down as it was not broken. Frank had spoken quietly to his friends at the local VFW hall. Maya had told a few of her more activist-minded friends at the university about what was happening. People were watching. They were angry, and they were waiting for a spark. Richie Gallo believed he was isolating his victim. He was about to find out that he had inadvertently started a rebellion. Tomorrow night's final negotiation would indeed be final. Just not in the way he could ever have imagined. What do you think is going through Anya's head right now? Is it cold, calculated revenge, or is there something more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And stick with me, because the fireworks are about to begin. Richie Gallo arrived at 9 p.m. sharp, his crew of 6 thugs in tow. They carried their bats and tire irons openly now, like Roman legionnaires marching into conquered territory. They were too high on their own power to notice the subtle changes on the street. Curtains were twitching in the apartments above the other shops. Across the street, in the shadows of a bus stop, Frank stood with 2 of his buddies from the VFW, his smartphone held steady, already recording. He was positioned perfectly, with a clear line of sight through the bookstore's front window, just as Anya had quietly suggested he might want to be during his coffee visit that morning. Richie kicked the front door open, letting it bang against the wall. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent store. "Decision time, sweetheart," he bellowed, his voice bouncing off the shelves. $2,000 a week or we redecorate this place with fire." Anya stood behind the counter. Her entire body screamed surrender. Her shoulders were slumped, her head was bowed, and her hands were trembling as she nervously polished the same spot on the counter again and again. "Please," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely a croak. "I told you, I don't have that kind of money. Can't we just talk about this?" "Talk about this?" Richie's laugh was a venomous cackle. "The time for talking is over, lady. Now it's time to pay." He gestured with his bat, and his men spread out, a practiced maneuver designed to intimidate and control the space. "Maybe we just break one of her arms," Tony, his lieutenant, suggested with a grin, flexing his thick fingers. "You know, as a down payment." Richie shook his head, savoring the moment, playing to his audience of thugs. "Nah, this one needs to be made an example of. She needs a lesson that lasts forever." He took a step closer to Anya, leaning over the counter until she could smell the stale beer and cigarettes on his breath. "You know what we do to people who disrespect my family?" Outside, Frank adjusted his phone, zooming in slightly, ensuring the microphone would pick up every word. More figures had joined him in the shadows, neighbors drawn by the unfolding drama at the heart of their community. "I'm gonna lock you in here," Richie hissed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And I'm gonna burn this whole damn building to the ground. Then maybe the rest of these cockroaches will understand what happens when they don't show me the proper respect." That was it. The magic words. Richie Gallo had just confessed his intent to commit murder. On camera, in front of witnesses, with CIA-grade audio equipment recording his every syllable. Anya Sharma, the bookstore owner, had everything she needed for a life sentence. But Richie had also crossed a far more dangerous line. He had just presented an imminent, credible, deadly threat. And Agent Cayley had 18 years of muscle memory dedicated to a single purpose: neutralizing imminent, deadly threats. The trembling in Anya's hands stopped. The slump in her shoulders vanished as her spine snapped ramrod straight. She lifted her head, and the tired, defeated eyes were gone. In their place was something ancient and predatory, a look of such cold, lethal focus that Richie's smug grin faltered. "Wrong answer, Richie," she said, her voice calm and clear. Richie's brain struggled to catch up. The terrified woman he'd been tormenting for weeks had been replaced by something else. "What did you just—" He never finished the sentence. Anya's left hand shot out, grabbing the heavy ceramic coffee pot from its warmer. In one fluid motion, she flung its scalding contents directly into Richie's face. He shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman sound of agony, stumbling backward and clawing at his blistering skin. Before his knees even hit the floor, Anya was in motion. The second thug, Tony, swung his baseball bat in a clumsy horizontal arc aimed at her skull. She wasn't there. She dropped below the swing, her hand grabbing a heavy, hardback copy of War and Peace from a display. She pivoted on her heel and drove the book's spine upward, directly into his throat. He made a sickening, gurgling sound and collapsed, his hands clutching his crushed larynx. The third attacker charged, raising a tire iron. Anya sidestepped him, grabbed his wrist with one hand, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the corner of a solid oak bookshelf. The sound of his nose breaking was a wet, percussive crack. He slid to the floor, unconscious. The fourth man, seeing his friends go down, hesitated. It was the last mistake he'd ever make. Anya grabbed the metal napkin dispenser from the counter and threw it like a discus. It caught him square on the temple. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. The fifth and sixth thugs were frozen in a state of shock and disbelief, their brains unable to process the sight of this middle-aged woman dismantling their crew with bookstore supplies. Anya vaulted over the counter with the agility of a gymnast. She kicked a rolling library ladder into the path of one man, sending him crashing into a rack of magazines. The last man turned to run, but Anya was already on him, her forearm pressing against his carotid artery. He was unconscious in less than 5 seconds. The entire confrontation had taken 27 seconds. Richie was on his hands and knees, whimpering, his face a mess of second-degree burns. Anya calmly walked over, planted a foot in the center of his back, and pushed him flat to the floor. "We're not done here," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion as she pulled a set of zip ties from behind the counter. Outside, Frank's phone had captured the entire brutal ballet. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from awe. "Holy Mother of God," he whispered, the words barely audible on the recording. "Did you see that? Who the hell is this woman?" The small crowd of neighbors was now pressed against the glass, their own phones out, recording the aftermath. Within minutes, multiple videos of the fight were hitting social media, captioned with things like, "Bookstore lady goes John Wick on local gang." Anya pulled out her own phone and dialed 911, her voice as steady as if she were ordering a pizza. "This is Anya Sharma at the Daily Grind, 112 West Miller Street. I require police and ambulance services. I've been the victim of an armed assault by 6 individuals. The situation is under my control. The suspects are secured and in need of medical attention." Richie, his wrists now tightly bound behind him, looked up at the woman who had just annihilated his crew. His face was a mask of pain, confusion, and terror. Who are you?" he stammered. Anya allowed herself a small, cold smile. It was not a reassuring sight. "I'm the person you should have left alone." But hundreds of miles away, in a fortified mansion outside of Atlantic City, Sal Gallo was watching Frank's shaky cell phone video on a massive screen. And unlike his foolish son, Sal Gallo was a man who never forgot a face, especially one that had cost him his entire Russian operation 15 years ago. "Kaylee," he whispered, the name a curse on his lips. "I thought you were dead." Sal Gallo watched the video of the bookstore fight for the 10th time, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his leather chair. At 65, he'd built a criminal empire on 2 pillars, brutal efficiency and a memory that never failed him. And the woman on the screen, the way she moved, the economy of violence, the utter lack of hesitation, he knew that woman. "Agent Kaylee," he said to the empty room, "so the CIA's ghost is haunting a bookstore in my city." Sal's memory was photographic. 15 years ago, a woman with those same eyes had infiltrated his operations in Moscow, posing as an art dealer. She had played his top lieutenants against each other, dismantled his supply lines, and ultimately cost him a fortune and 2 years of his life fighting extradition. Official intelligence reports claimed she'd been killed in a cartel ambush in Mexico 5 years back. Sal now understood that the CIA was very good at creative paperwork. Her presence in Baltimore, in the very neighborhood he was clearing out, was no coincidence. It was a declaration of war. By dawn, Sal had unleashed the most lethal weapon in his arsenal, his legal team. By the time the sun was up, Richie Gallo was being transferred from a police holding cell to a luxury suite in a private hospital, his face artfully bandaged. He was giving a tearful, perfectly rehearsed performance for a local news crew. "She used all these anti-Italian slurs," Richie sobbed, his voice cracking on cue. "She said she was going to teach a stupid Guido a lesson he'd never forget. We were just trying to talk to her, and she just went insane." The narrative was brilliant in its simplicity. It twisted just enough of the truth to be utterly believable. Yes, Richie and his men were in the store. Yes, Anya had attacked them with extreme prejudice. And the medical reports on his crew, a crushed larynx, a fractured skull, a shattered kneecap, painted a picture of shocking brutality. In the politically charged climate of modern America, a claim of a racially motivated hate crime was media gold. Richie's lawyer, a slick $1,000-an-hour shark paid for by Sal, held a press conference on the hospital steps. My client and his friends, all respected members of a local Italian-American business association, were the victims of a vicious, unprovoked, and racially charged assault, he declared to a bank of cameras. 6 young men have been hospitalized, some with life-altering injuries, because one woman decided to answer a business dispute with savage violence. Not. The cell phone video that had made Anya a viral hero just hours before was suddenly recontextualized. Social media, a notoriously fickle beast, began to turn. The hashtag Chos Bookstore Badass was overtaken by Forstjosker Bookstore Butcher. Commentators and online trolls debated whether her response was self-defense or a disproportionate hateful rampage. Cable news channels, smelling blood in the water, descended on the story. Vigilante justice or hate crime, screamed the Chirons. So-called community activists, all secretly on Sal's payroll, appeared on talk shows to decry Anya's actions as a dangerous example of violence begetting violence. The shift was devastatingly swift. Protesters, holding professionally printed signs that read, "Justice for Richie" and "Stop the Hate," appeared outside the daily grind, which was now cordoned off with police tape. News crews shoved microphones in the faces of neighbors who, intimidated by Gallo's reputation, suddenly recalled Anya as being standoffish and having an angry energy. Worst of all, the CIA was forced to abandon her. Marcus Thorne met Anya in a secure location, his face grim. Sal Gallo has a federal judge on his payroll. They're fast-tracking charges. Aggravated assault, maybe even attempted murder. We can't step in without compromising the entire investigation into the port. What about my recordings? Anya demanded. Richie threatened to burn me alive. I have it on crystal-clear audio. Inadmissible, Thorne countered, his voice tight with frustration. You're a civilian. It would be thrown out as an illegal wiretap. Any half-decent lawyer, and Sal has the best, would shred it. He paused, the weight of his next words heavy in the air. Langley is classifying this as a compromised operation. They're preparing an extraction protocol. New identity, new city. It's over, Kelly. Extraction. The word felt like a surrender. It meant abandoning Frank and Maya and the other neighbors who had stood with her. Frank still stood across the street, a silent, one-man counter-protest against the crowd chanting for her arrest. Maya had started a GoFundMe for her legal defense. These people still believed in her, even as the world turned against her. More than that, extraction meant Sal Gallo would win. He had successfully weaponized the American legal and media system to neutralize a federal agent, leaving him free to continue his conquest of Baltimore. The final, crushing blow came when Richie's official medical records were released to the press. The doctors, also on Sal's payroll, had exaggerated every injury. Severe facial burns with a high probability of permanent scarring. Post-concussion syndrome with potential for long-term cognitive impairment. The media narrative solidified. Anya wasn't a hero. She was a monster who had brutally maimed a young man. Her court-appointed public defender, a young, overwhelmed man buried under a mountain of cases, urged her to take a deal. They're offering assault with a deadly weapon. You plead guilty, you get 5 years probation and mandatory anger management classes. If you take this to trial, they'll paint you as a racist vigilante, and you'll be looking at 20 years. Take the deal, Ms. Sharma. It's the only sane move. Standing in the silence of her shuttered bookstore, surrounded by the ghosts of her dreams, Anya realized the terrifying genius of Sal Gallo's plan. He hadn't beaten her with fists or guns. He had turned her greatest strength, her elite combat training, into the very evidence of her guilt. Every move that had been designed to save her life now looked like excessive, sadistic force. Outside, the protesters lit candles, holding a vigil for the victims of her violent outburst. Inside, Agent Kaylee sat alone in the dark, a ghost trapped in a machine she couldn't fight. For 18 years, her country had trained her to fight terrorists, cartels, and rogue states. But they had never trained her for this. They had never taught her how to fight an enemy who wielded public opinion like a weapon. But Sal Gallo, in his arrogance, had made one critical miscalculation. He was so focused on destroying Anya Sharma, the bookstore owner, that he forgot he was still dealing with Kali, a master of asymmetric warfare. And tomorrow morning, she was going to remind him what that meant. Anya Sharma made a call that would either be the final nail in her coffin or the masterstroke of her career. She dialed Marcus Thorne at Oro 600, her voice cold and resolute, and delivered an ultimatum that shredded every page of the CIA operations handbook. "I want a town hall, a public forum. Get me in the same room as Richie Gallo," she said, cutting through any pleasantries. "Open to the public, open microphones, and make sure every local news station is live streaming it. I'm going to clear my name, and I'm going to burn Sal Gallo's entire empire to the ground on live television." Thorne's voice was a panicked squawk. "That's insane, Kaylee. That's career suicide. You break cover. You violate a dozen federal statutes. Langley will disavow you. You'll be on your own." "I'm not asking for authorization, Marcus," Anya interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm telling you what is happening. You can either provide covert support, or you can prepare to explain to a congressional oversight committee why you allowed the most significant organized crime operation on the East Coast to slip through your fingers because you were scared of bad press." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Thorne spoke, his voice a resigned sigh. "What do you need?" By noon the next day, the main auditorium at the Baltimore City Community Center was a powder keg. News cameras lined the back wall. The folding chairs were a sea of divided loyalties. On one side, Richie's paid protesters and fake supporters. On the other, a small but defiant group of Anya's neighbors, led by Frank and Maya. Richie Gallo sat at a table on the stage, his bandages looking fresh and stark under the bright lights. A perfect portrait of victimhood. His lawyer had prepped him for hours. Play the victim. Emphasize the racial slurs. Do not deviate from the script. What Richie didn't know was that for the past 48 hours, a CIA technical surveillance team had been living on his digital shoulder. Every encrypted text from his father, every strategy session with his legal team, every coached phone call had been intercepted under a secret FISA warrant authorized by a very nervous Marcus Thorne. Sal Gallo himself sat in the back row, a Roman emperor ready to watch the lions devour his enemy. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards, his expression one of smug satisfaction. He had come to witness the public self-destruction of Agent Kali. Anya walked onto the stage wearing a simple gray blouse and slacks. She looked like what she was supposed to be, a tired, middle-aged woman who was in way over her head. The moderator, a well-known local news anchor, started by lobbing softballs at Richie. "Mr. Gallo, please, in your own words, tell us what happened that night." Richie's performance was worthy of an Oscar. He talked about his dream of investing in the community. He described being met with a torrent of hateful anti-Italian slurs. His voice cracked as he recounted the unprovoked and savage attack. "She had this look of pure evil in her eyes," Richie said, dabbing a tear from behind his bandages. "She said she was going to make an example out of me. Then it all went black." The crowd murmured in sympathy. It was working. "Ms. Sharma," the moderator said, turning to Anya, "a powerful accusation. How do you respond?" Anya stood, not behind the lectern, but walking to the front of the stage, creating a direct line of sight with Richie. Every camera zoomed in. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room. "Richie Gallo is a liar," she said, the words clean and sharp, "and I'm about to prove it." His lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection! This is a public forum, not a trial. My client will not be subjected to this kind of character assassination." Anya ignored him, her eyes locked on Richie. "Mr. Gallo, you said you were there to discuss a business opportunity. Tell us, what specific investment were you proposing at 9 o'clock at night, accompanied by 6 men carrying baseball bats and tire irons?" Richie's rehearsed composure flickered. We were discussing development plans." "Development plans," Anya repeated, her tone conversational. "Your police report, however, makes no mention of development plans, but it does mention that you and your associates were unarmed. Yet we have sworn affidavits from 7 different witnesses who saw your men carrying weapons. So, which is it, Mr. Gallo? Were you lying to the police then, or are you lying to all of us now?" The lawyer was shouting now, but the moderator, sensing a massive story unfolding, waved him down. In the audience, a seed of doubt had been planted. People were shifting in their seats. "Let's talk about that investment," Anya continued, taking a step closer. "Did it, by any chance, involve a weekly payment of $2,000? A payment you referred to as insurance?" "I don't have to answer that," Richie stammered, looking to his lawyer for help. "No, you don't," Anya agreed. "But maybe your father would like to answer. Specifically, why has the Gallo Family Trust made 3 separate payments totaling over $200,000 to your lawyer's firm in the last 72 hours? The room fell dead silent. Every single camera swiveled to the back of the room, landing on Sal Gallo, whose face had turned to stone. He had just walked into an ambush. Anya held up her phone and pressed a button. An audio file played over the auditorium's sound system, the quality so clear it was as if the speakers were in the room. Richie's voice. "She's a tough one, but they all have a breaking point. You just gotta find the right button to push." Sal Gallo's voice. "Make sure she understands that this neighborhood belongs to us now. I don't care what it takes. End it!" Richie's face went corpse white beneath his bandages. He was staring at Anya, but he wasn't seeing a bookstore owner anymore. He was seeing a ghost, and the dawning horror in his eyes was absolute. "My name," Anya said, her voice now ringing with command, "is Agent Anya Sharma of the Central Intelligence Agency. For the past 11 months, I have been part of a federally authorized covert operation investigating the criminal activities of the Gallo organization." A wave of shocked gasps swept through the room. "Richie Gallo and his associates," she continued, her voice cutting through the noise, "have been running a violent extortion racket on behalf of his father, Salvatore Gallo, with the goal of systematically destroying local businesses to make way for a fraudulent real estate development. The narrative of a hate crime was a lie, orchestrated by Sal Gallo himself to discredit a federal investigation." On cue, a dozen men and women in dark suits rose from their seats in the audience. They were FBI agents, brought in by Thorne to provide tactical support. They moved calmly and professionally toward Sal Gallo and his bodyguards. Richie sat paralyzed, watching his entire world crumble on live television. "The night of the incident," Anya's voice boomed, "Mr. Gallo threatened to burn me alive inside my store. That threat, along with every other crime he has committed, has been recorded. And it will be used to send him and his father to federal prison for the rest of their natural lives." Sal Gallo was being placed in handcuffs when Richie finally found his voice. "You're CIA?" he whispered, the microphone picking up the sound. Anya looked at him, the last vestiges of the meek bookstore owner gone forever. She gave him that same cold, terrifying smile from the night of the fight. "Someone you should have left alone." The room, which had been filled with his paid supporters just minutes before, erupted in a thunderous, spontaneous ovation. But Richie Gallo could only stare at the woman who had just publicly executed his family's legacy. Finally, and fatally, understanding that he had spent months trying to bully one of the most dangerous women on the planet. Sal Gallo's escape was as audacious as it was predictable. A man with his level of influence didn't stay in a federal holding cell for long. The armored transport van was T-boned by a garbage truck, a perfectly timed and executed ambush. By the time the dust settled, Sal was gone. When the call came, Anya knew this was the only way it could end. He wasn't after her. He was after a symbol. He had taken Maya, the bright-eyed college student, from her off-campus apartment. "The old shipyard, Pier 4, Sal's voice rasped over Maya's phone. "Come alone, Kaylee. No cops, no feds, or the girl gets a lesson in gravity from the top of a crane. You have 1 hour. Marcus Thorne stood in front of her, his face pale with dread. "Don't do this, Kaylee. This is suicide. We can't authorize a solo rescue. He's a cornered animal." "Then it's not an authorized mission," Anya replied, chambering around in her seg sour. "That girl is innocent. She's not part of the game. I am." The abandoned shipyard was a skeleton of rusted steel and decaying concrete on the edge of the Patapsco River. Broken windows on derelict warehouses stared out like vacant eyes. Anya moved through the main gate, her footsteps the only sound in the cathedral of decay. Sal stood on a catwalk 50 feet up, circling the base of a massive loading crane. He had Maya in a chokehold, a large revolver pressed against her head. She was sobbing, her face streaked with tears. 2 men stood at the base of the stairs leading up to the catwalk. They weren't street thugs like Richie's crew. These were professionals. Killers. "Agent Kaylee," Sal shouted, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You took everything from me. My son, my business, my name. Tonight I take something from you." "Let her go, Sal," Anya called back, her voice betraying no fear, even as her mind calculated angles and distances. "This is between us. This is about the arrogance of a government that sends ghosts to haunt honest businessmen," Sal screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "You people hide behind your badges and your secret laws, and you destroy lives." The first professional moved to flank her, but Anya had already mapped the terrain. Every rusted barrel, every stack of decaying pallets, every shadow was a piece of cover. She dove behind a massive engine block as a gunshot rang out, sparking off the metal inches from her head. She came up firing, 2 rounds, center mass. The first man dropped without a sound. The second was smarter, using the labyrinth of machinery to his advantage. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse in the shadows. But Anya wasn't just a shooter. She was a predator. She used the environment, ricocheting a shot off a steel plate to make him flinch, then closing the distance in the moment of distraction. The fight was short, silent, and brutal. Sal, watching from above, pressed the gun harder into Maya's temple. "Stay back. I swear to God I'll do it." "No, you won't, Sal," Anya said, stepping out into the open, her own weapon now lowered, "because then you lose your only piece of leverage." The next 5 minutes were a masterclass in psychological warfare. It was why she was Kaylee. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She systematically dismantled him, using every piece of intelligence she had ever gathered on his history, his fears, his pathetic need to be seen as a king when he was just a common thug. "You're not a mob boss, Sal," she said, her voice calm and conversational as she slowly walked closer. "You're a coward. You've spent your whole life paying other men to take your risks. Your own son had more guts than you do. At least he faced me himself." Sal's hand began to tremble. The gun wavered. "Shut up, you don't know me." "I know everything about you," Anya continued, taking another deliberate step. "I know you've been terrified ever since Moscow. looking over your shoulder every day for 15 years, just waiting for the ghost to reappear. Well, here I am, Sal. The nightmare is real. The psychological onslaught shattered his remaining composure. With a scream of pure rage, he shoved Maya away from him and swung his gun toward Anya. But years of paranoia and rage had made him slow. Anya was already moving, her body a blur of trained reflexes. She disarmed him with a move that broke his wrist, the gun clattering onto the steel catwalk. Sal Gallo lay on the ground, a broken old man, sobbing and screaming for his lawyer. Maya, shaken but safe, rushed down the stairs and into Anya's arms. The celebration that followed wasn't a news story. It was a block party. Miller Street was shut down as neighbors, shop owners, and ordinary people came to shake the hand of the woman who had faced down the Gallo family, and won. Someone had hung a handmade banner over the door of the Daily Grind, home of Agent Kali. Richie Gallo, facing a lifetime in prison, did something no one expected. He cooperated fully, testifying against his father's entire network in exchange for a reduced sentence. Standing in court, he looked not at the judge, but at the community members he had terrorized. "I thought being strong meant making people fear you," he said, his voice quiet and heavy with shame. "Ms. Sharma taught me that real strength is making people feel safe." 3 months later, Anya Sharma submitted her official resignation to the Central Intelligence Agency. She stayed in Baltimore. The Daily Grind reopened, but it was now also home to the Baltimore Community Action Center, a nonprofit she funded herself, offering free legal aid, self-defense classes, and small business consulting for anyone being intimidated by organized crime. The Fundratog Stand Up Strong movement, born from Maya's GoFundMe page, had gone national, inspiring similar community-led movements in dozens of cities. But for Anya, the real victory was in the small things. It was Janet Morrison, the retired schoolteacher who now occupied the corner booth every day, organizing neighborhood watch meetings. It was Derek Morrison, who, after his release, volunteered at the center, sharing his story with at-risk kids. And it was Carlos Hernandez, who still arrived at 6 a.m. for his coffee, now with his daughter, who was learning martial arts from a former CIA operative. Sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought in foreign war zones. They're fought on quiet streets, in small businesses, by ordinary people who find the courage to stand up. 6 months after Sal Gallo began his life sentence, the Daily Grind was the most famous coffee shop in Baltimore. Not for its coffee, which was still just average, but for what it represented. Hope. It was proof that one person, armed with courage and conviction, could face down a monster and win. The change in the neighborhood was palpable. Where fear once reigned, a sense of defiant community now flourished. Carlos Hernandez, the construction worker whose video had started it all, was now a foreman, a local hero who was helping to rebuild the very neighborhood the Gallos had tried to destroy. Derek Morrison's transformation was the most profound. He'd discovered a new kind of strength in his vulnerability, his talks to troubled teens becoming a powerful tool for change. "I spent my life trying to be my father," he told a documentary crew. "Agent Sharma taught me the importance of being a better man than him." The Tuktuk Stand Up Strong movement had become a force for actual policy change. Citing the Baltimore model, Congress passed new legislation protecting small businesses from racketeering and massively increased funding for community-level undercover operations. But the real victory was written on the faces of the people on Miller Street, in the children playing in the park after sunset, in the new businesses opening in the once boarded-up storefronts. The walls of the Daily Grind were now a mosaic of photographs sent from all over the country, stories of other communities, other heroes who had been inspired to fight back. Anya stood behind the same counter where Richie Gallo had threatened her life, pouring a cup of coffee for Frank. A local news crew was there for a follow-up story, a testament to the enduring power of her actions. She turned to their camera, her expression calm, her eyes holding the wisdom of 1,000 battles, both seen and unseen. "There are heroes everywhere," she said, her voice carrying a quiet power. "They aren't superheroes. They're your neighbors, your friends, the person who serves you coffee. They are people waiting for a reason to be brave." She gestured to the wall of photos. "The question is never about whether they exist. The only question is, when they decide to stand up, will you be brave enough to stand with them? Share this story if you believe that the courage of one can awaken the courage of many. Subscribe if you want to be reminded that there is still good in this world worth fighting for. And comment below with a time you saw an ordinary person do something extraordinary. Because bullies, whether they're on the playground or running a criminal empire, are counting on your silence. Never, ever give them that power." The camera lingered on her face, then panned to the bustling, vibrant community she had saved, and in turn, had been saved by. A community that had learned the most important lesson of all. Real strength isn't the power to destroy. It's the courage to protect.